What's going on, brother?
How you doing? How you doing? Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for saying yes. I'm like, you know what? I had to have this interview with you. And what was so profound is that I really know I had to say yes and reach out because the way it happened, and when God moves in a certain type of way, I acknowledge the way He moves for me.
Absolutely.
So when I saw an email in my business email about your podcast, I was like, okay, this is nothing but God. So let me go ahead and reach out and see what He's about. And the biggest thing for me was actually seeing what you are all about. It's knowing that you are literally someone that thinks like me, and see how helping other individuals and lifting them up, and it's not about how much money you make and all of the fancy things, is literally helping those that need the help. And I've seen your podcast, I've seen your interviews with other podcasters, and I really just wanted to actually get some more clarity about who you are as not only a business coach, but to have this deep dive about this mindset, right? So before we do all of that, tell me before you got into this space, the business entrepreneur space, where did it all begin? Because I believe that our past is tied to our purpose.
Absolutely. Yeah. It all began in New York. Born and raised in New York, grew up in the quote unquote hood, but a lot of places can be misjudged for a hood based off of circumstance alone. And what I'm learning to understand as what a hood has become from over time is actually the people that reside in it, because you can have a well-developed area that can still have hoodlums, and that would make it a hood. And so it's been a mission to really just change people as a whole, because no matter what geography we have around us, if the person themselves doesn't change, then not a whole lot changes. But growing up in New York, being able to understand the four seasons in a whole, where you go through the winter, the summer, spring, fall, all of that, and you're forced to understand life a little differently. It's a lot more fast paced out there. It's a lot less friendly, but also a lot more friendly at the same time. um, it's definitely more of a melting pot. So it's not like you grow up with one group of people. And living and growing up that way definitely kept my mind open to just exploring the rest of the world.
Yeah. So it shaped you. And then the going into the Marine Corps. So the military as a whole, it makes you stronger, right? Right. I have, my father-in-law and a couple of my family members have gone and experienced some things based off of their choices to go take that route. And they has made them stronger. Not only that, you've been able to see different things. So I do appreciate, number one, your service and what you've done, but coming out of that as well. So, have you always been someone that wanted to go into entrepreneurship?
I would say yes. I've had maybe three 9 to 5s my entire life, and they were all as a kid. And even with those, I always had an issue with how things were formatted, with how things kind of broke down, with how, leadership really took care of leadership, because what we got introduced to as managers or people that we interacted that were in powers of position were typically most of the time just people that were there longer. And what I found out was they don't really care as much as you would think that they do. They're there to get a check most of the time, and then they're out of there. And so, I never wanted to stay in a system where it was like fighting for somebody's attention or fighting to build something greater without being able to get a real bigger piece of the pie.
Yeah. It's funny because I talk about leadership as well, but I also believe that you have to be able to lead yourself before you lead others, and your intentions have to be there. To be someone to actually lead a group of individuals, it depends on the person. And yes, we do see that. So I I acknowledge that as well, even having 20 plus years of leadership myself. So tell me your why, right? So why are you doing what you're doing? And then I want to know what you do.
So when people typically ask me what my why is, I say the same thing every time. I don't have a why. I have a why not.
Okay.
And so my why not is why can't I? I've dealt with a lot of things in my life where I've been told no. I've been told I can't, and I've been told that I'll never be able to. And so instead of having more so of a why, I've developed more of a why not. And that's kept me always on the edge of innovation when it comes to creating new things, doing new things, seeking new things, doing things that seem impossible, really taking it to the next level.
Hmm. It's funny that you say that. I've never heard it put that way. I mean, because I know when someone says, you hire me and why do you need this job? And they be like, well, why not? So
Yeah.
I also read, not read, but I also heard that you don't believe in like the whole motivation thing. Why is that?
I don't. So, true discipline, I make it an equation because that's the principles of life that we grew up on. When you go to school, when you go to, high school, college, whatever, they throw all these things at you that you probably still haven't used half of them. But an equation's one of them. And I usually put discipline equals time management plus accountability put together. And so without that, there's no motivation in that word. And a direct synonym of that word is mindset. And so if you have the proper mindset and develop a proper discipline from it, you don't really need motivation to get to the next level, because motivation is something that has to keep happening. Motivation is something that sounds good and it might even make you feel good for the moment. There's certain times where that's good. I think motivation is more so used for competition sakes. You're running a marathon and you have to push through. You maybe have an hour left. You're running a race, or you're in a some type of any kind of competition up front where the ending is nearby. The ending is within distance. That could be a game, that could be a whatever. You can use motivating factors for things like that, but when we use it for our life, I don't really like to use it for life, because life is something that goes on forever. It's the longest thing that we'll ever do. And so when you use motivation in that term of life, it doesn't really fit if you look at it, because it's something that's meant to just be for the moment. Now, when you develop a mindset, you start to develop discipline on a deeper level. And that deeper level, combining the time management and your accountability together, create a whole endless streak of possibilities. Mindset and discipline has stopped people from um, becoming addicts or coming out of addiction. Being able to continue entrepreneurship, being able to go to the gym. Somebody who is training to be a bodybuilder knows that they would want to eat other stuff, or that they have to train every day. They can't do certain things, they can't drink certain things, they can't sleep at certain times. And motivation wouldn't work for that individual. They have to develop a mindset. And the same thing is, for an entrepreneur. You go through things that you don't want to do, so no motivation no longer fits.
Interesting perspective. Like seriously. I mean, interesting perspective. I've never heard it put that way in quite that in that quite those way in quite that way, as far as looking at it from a mindset versus a motivation factor. I am someone that, because of my past and losing my mom at such a early age, I felt like I had, I'm not necessarily meaning the motivation, but I guess I had the drive and the faith, right? To push through, because I knew I was greater than what my environment was and what people thought that I was going to become based off of where I live or my zip code. So I guess it was more so. I guess that would bring me to my next question for you. Is like, do you have what are your thoughts on taking or believing in having faith versus that mindset?
You always have to have faith. Faith is being able to take the next step, not knowing what's going to happen. We're in our building right now. We just got last year, and at the beginning of last year, before even conceptualization, before a plan, before anything, I was telling some of the contractors, some of the other teammates, like, hey, we're going to get a building. And they're like, "What?" It didn't even make sense, because it was so massive of a thing. And not only did we get it, but we put money into it, and people came, and it's already been booked by Spotify, some NFL people, some other stuff. It's only been a few months, and the website's not even up yet. And so being able to do things of extreme importance to yourself, to your passion, to your purpose, takes that level of faith, and faith comes in so many forms. Faith comes in other people. Faith comes in, your work ethic. Faith comes in understanding finances, and faith ultimately comes in understanding God, being able to follow that plan that is there for you without fully knowing all the pieces that you have for it.
Yes. So why did you create Attractive Mindset?
So attractive mindset ultimately came from me wanting to give back to the community, because when I was in the community at first as a bystander before the military, I did a lot of harm to the community, and I'd be lying if I didn't say that I did. You know, at 16 years old, I got kicked out my house, and my mom moved to Atlanta, pretty much left me in New York. My family didn't really take me in. I had a cousin in them who took me in at first, but then he went to jail, and so it turned into this whole thing where I kind of had to fend for myself. I finished high school by myself at 17, and I went to the streets. That was what embraced me at the time, and so I ended up going over a friend's house, and his mom ended up leaving. His dad ended up dying, and she pretty much left him as well. To take care of her own mental health at that time. We didn't understand, but yeah, we were just left with a house, and we're kids, literally 18, 18, 19 years old at this point, and we tried to keep the house up, but this is of like a full house in New York with electricity, water bills, mortgage, all of that stuff, and we couldn't do it, and so it fell through, and they came, they put it under foreclosure, they boarded it up, we took the boards off of it, then they took the hot water off, then they took the electricity off, like they did all of that stuff, and we stayed in the house. We had a roof over our head, but there was it was a shell. It was the house was just a shell, and so being forced to grow up in New York at that kind of time in a hood environment. We were a circumstance of our environment, and so I ended up stealing a lot of things, robbing things, doing things that I really didn't want to do, but just had to do in order to survive at the time, until I was presented with the opportunity to go to the military.
Hmm. So that experience allowed you to say, "Hey, I want to create a attractive mindset or the business to do so."
Yeah. So, being able to go on that journey into the military, going on deployments, I had time to really think, because on, just one of the deployments in Bahrain, we're talking 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, 1 day off, and there's really nothing else to do. You're in the middle of the desert. And so I read maybe like 40 or 42 books out there in a 7.5 month time span. And when I got out, I said, cool, I have to be the one that changes my environment, changes my life. And something that really stood out to me was the law of attraction. And so the law of attraction taught me that, what I would like, you get what you put out. And so
Mhm.
being able to be the kind of person that I want to see or develop or whatever attached to it, that's how I came up with that. And I'm like, okay, cool. Then once I got out, used the GI Bill, went to school for psychology and arts, double major, and learned how to really cultivate something from there and understand my mind more. Because even when I got out, I still had problems. I probably had more problems when I got out, because I went in for a combat MOS, and you can't really bring a combat MOS back into regular society. And so now I'm back, to where I was before, except I don't really have like a crazy amount of skills or anything, but at least I have the government willing to pay for school and whatnot. So I leveraged that to my advantage and started really developing different businesses. And I lost a lot of money doing it. I failed a lot doing it. I even got put in a psych ward for a little while. I had a drinking problem for a little while. I lost money. I lost the ability to use credit. Um, but I still kept going. That's where that faith came in. Like, hey, if you're gonna win, you're gonna win. And it came towards the end of what they call my GI Bill, where they pay for your schooling, and they said, hey, for you to switch over and continue your education for psychology, it would take 8 to 10 years to get a full PhD type degree, and it would be X amount. Versus if I just start something myself and develop it from there, I could really, sky's the limit. And so That's what attractive mindset, began for me, being able to put back out what I had kind of took back from my community, because I took good energy from my community by putting negative energy into the community. And so attractive mindset was made for me to interact with people like myself from back then that didn't know what else was out there. Not because they weren't trying to know, not because they were underprivileged or anything like that, but simply they don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And so somebody who might be confused, they don't have a plan for a job, or they don't have a plan for school, they don't have a plan for anything. They're just living at the moment, and whatever is in direct proximity to them, they kind of take on. That was me back then, because the military was the first people that reached out to me in that situation. And I said, yeah. And I ended up doing time for it. But if a business person on the level of this kind of business reached out to me at the same time and said, hey, this is what the world could be, this is what you could do, I'd have took that too. And so literally just giving the opportunity to people to say, hey, you have another option, you have a choice.
Mm, having the choice to make a decision.
Yeah.
God gives us that's the beauty in it is he literally gives us the power of choice, and
Mhm.
just choosing, and he will direct your path. And here, what you basically saying, what I hear you say is that based off of your circumstances, and I don't think it's still by chance, because you actually went to school for psychology, and now
Yeah.
thinking about the business that you're in and how you're actually thinking, your thought process, even with the law of attraction and having a psychology degree, and even the arts, those things literally have already defined you, and it was based off of purpose, right? And I'm huge on having the purpose that God gave you, and before he even formed you, he knew you. So it was all divine, just even based off of where you are now and what your formula, how you formulated your business. So I did have a question, because I'm curious, but based off of what you said and how everything transformed for you, even on the streets, and the hard upbringing that you shared. So I mean, all of those obstacles that you were faced with, people don't realize that even building a business bring obstacles. You said you lost money and all of those things. So give us some clarity on, how did you overcome that to say, you know what, I still wanted to move forward entrepreneurship, because a lot of people don't want to continue after losing thousands and millions of dollars.
100%. And you have to think about yourself in almost like a warrior kind of mindset, but also in a progressive mindset. And what I mean by that is, obviously, if we go from birth, what are the first things you physically do as a child? You crawl, right? Then you go into walking, then you go into running and jumping and all of that kind of stuff. Then from there, as you grow up, you can enter something to actually do something where it might be track. You run for a certain amount of time, you sprint, you jog, then you go into a marathon. And a marathon becomes the extreme point of what a lot of people do, because it's hard work. And then there's a stage beyond the marathon. Then you might have like a triathlon. Then you might have like a Spartan race. Then you might have, something even beyond the triathlon, where these are the like 1% of people that are doing these things physically with their body. And I said all of that to say entrepreneurship is the same way. A lot of people will stop at the sprint. A lot of people will stop at the marathon. A lot of people will never make it to the Spartan race. And the obstacles don't stop. They actually get bigger and they get harder. And it becomes a lot less easy to accomplish. But once you do accomplish it, you gain the title. And so I don't think I ever really got over the obstacles. I just changed which obstacle course I'm on, because I'm dealing with obstacles right now.
Change the obstacle course. I like that one for sure. So what is having a an attractive mindset looks like? Like what did that how did you put that together? Like, okay, I'm just, attractive mindset, because I know in the coaching space, in the counseling space, we always, number one thing we want to talk about our mindset, even with um someone that is starting something new. I need to know where your mindset is to ensure that you can actually get the result. So what does an attractive mindset look like?
So an attractive mindset is, I like to tell people, how do you plan to be the most attractive person in the room? Automatically a lot of thoughts go to physicality, how you look, beautify. But there's four systems to mindset. You have your mental mindset, you have your emotional mindset, you have your physical mindset, and then lastly, you have your financial mindset. And all of these work in tandem with each other in order to keep you at like a homeostasis. And so typically if you're having issues in one of these areas, they definitely reflect on the financial mindset, because if you're not in tune with the other versions of yourself, you never really get to the point where money becomes a different kind of threshold for you. We live in a society where a lot of entrepreneurs nowadays, well, first, a lot more exist than used to exist. But even with that, a lot more are barely doing six figures, or they're happy to do six figures. And if you look at the numbers, statistics, and this goes to websites, don't just quote me, ssa.gov, sba.gov, sec.gov, all of these type of websites will flesh out in real time what's happening in our community as far as entrepreneurship opportunities are going, and even W2 opportunities are going. And so um you have something that starts to develop where we don't understand how big the world is. You're still considered a small business if you're making less than $7.4 million a year. You know, and I tell people that all the time, and they're still aiming for six figures, or they're happy when they have 1 million. You're still considered a startup if you haven't even had more than 50 million in revenue. And so it becomes a factor of information. It becomes a factor of really understanding not only yourself but the world around you and how you interact with that world. And that's what really starts to develop an attractive mindset, because once you do that, everything starts to come into you at once.
I like that. I have to agree with you on that one. So, with the multitude of things that you have going on in the businesses that you've actually built and those that you've helped, and you share that you actually went to school. So I've had this conversation with even not only my mentor but others that are in the inner circles and things like that. What is your take on our educational system right now? Do you believe in going to college, or what are your thoughts on that? Because a lot of people are on the fence. Oh, still go to school and get the degree or start your business. What is your take on that?
Honestly, do what drives you, And I've seen W2 college people that turn entrepreneurs. And just because you go to school doesn't mean you can't get into entrepreneurship. A lot of people are like, oh, I didn't go to school. I just took the entrepreneur route. Okay, cool. That's one way to do it. I know some people that just took the college route and never even did jobs within their degree field. I know people that did do jobs within their degree field, did well at it, and then still got into entrepreneurship, because at the end of the day, the message is the same across the board. We're not meant to work 40 hours a week for 40 years of our life, period. And so, no matter which way you do it, you still come to the same result of, man, I'm working, and I'm working too hard sometimes for different stuff. And so, whether that's entrepreneurship, whether that's a 9 to 5, what's your plan? That's what really matters to me, and that's what I tell people all the time. I've helped people make more money in their 9 to 5, and I've helped more people make money in their business. It doesn't really matter, because what you create is a system, and what we start to do is we start to create money, not make money. Make money happens linearly. That's trading your time for dollars. Anybody can make money as long as you trade time for dollars. Creating money is where the system starts to change, where you start to now, if X plus Y equals Z, then you can come up with your own equation to produce dollars, to produce results, creating and solving problems, because you're going to create a problem, but you're also going to solve a problem. As many people complain about Amazon, oh, they don't pay the workers, they don't do this, they don't do that. As massive as they are, they've created a lot of opportunities for a lot of people. Walmart, um, any major business that you can look at, literally that's the story for it. And so there's always going to be a yin and yang there. There's always going to be a positive and a negative at
Hmm.
the same time. But what outweighs the negative has to be the result of the problem that you're fixing.
Yeah.
So
So what is your obsession? Like, what is it that you obsess about?
what I obsess about is being able to help black men and women reach a
Yeah.
six-figure threshold on their own time.
How do you do that?
I do that by teaching them how to do what they like to do. And so if they like to braid, if they like to shoot videos, if they like to do eyebrows, if they like to mow the lawn, if they like to draw, if they like to run a business, if they like to help, if they like to serve, anything. Because literally there's somebody making money in every single category. And being able to bring freedom to our community is probably the overarching word for my obsession. Being able to understand that, hey, we do have a choice. We're not limited to things like DEI. We're not limited to things like stuck in one place. We're not limited to things like, stockroom workers or cashiers or anything like that. If you do it, you do it. But there's more out there. And, history has proven that. But we've also done our part to do worse for our own history. A lot of people like to bring up Black Wall Street or, Tulsa, Oklahoma, where they burned the town down. Cool. They did do that the first time, but we rebuilt it back a second time. And when we rebuilt it back a second time, it was us that messed up the town. And so being able to have knowledge of self and knowledge for our own community is what something that I want to build.
I like that. So let me ask you that because you're a business coach, and what you basically saying is that you helping other individuals become entrepreneurs. And I've been in rooms where people made $1 million in a day, $10 million in a day, and
Mhm.
so and then two, you have those that are out there that are calling themselves coaches and calling themselves experts and really don't do what they say they can do. And I call it the fake attraction, to be honest with you, because they go
Yeah.
get the cars and they're renting the houses and all of the things to attract um a certain audience or a certain ideal client, as they call it, right? What is your take on that? Because it's going on, and the fact that I really don't fall into the hoopla of it, but you have a lot of people out here that are really just wanting to do better for themselves and for their families, and they're taking out their 401k and their mortgages is a thing. What is your take on that?
That goes back into the conversation of motivation. A lot of people who get caught in the fallacies of materialistic things usually want to be motivated. They're looking for a quick fix to a problem that's everlasting. They're no matter what we do on this earth, somebody after us has to complete it. We'll never get the job done. There is no done within our lifetime, or in a foreseeable lifetime. It's just our life is not a movie where we have just an end. We have a beginning, but we don't know what happens at the end and what it goes into. That's where generational wealth has to come intact because going back to our grandfathers and great grandfathers and great great grandfathers and all that stuff, everybody has done something different in order to advance us, hinder us, rekindle the flame or push us around in different directions, and it comes down to the next generation to either keep it going or not keep it going. And so something that we might be working super hard for may not even continue and we'll have not that much control over it. Of course, they have things like trusts and all of that stuff now, but even with that, companies have failed big time, and it all comes down to the person, the individual. Right now we're at a prime time for M&A, which is mergers and acquisitions, where the boomers want to get out of business and their kids don't want their business, which
Mhm.
is crazy because their businesses aren't failing. But now you have people that don't really care for it, and they want to give it up because it's not what they're into, and they're selling it, and they're selling it low, even in some cases, just because they're tired. They can't work anymore. They can't do it anymore. They don't want to do it anymore. They've been doing it for their 40, 50 years already. And so we end up in this cycle that almost never really ends. And, that motivation factor of seeing things quickly for most people, since we're in so much of a digital age and digital deluge is super high. The
Mhm.
amount of information that we process on social media at any given time becomes very, what's the word I don't want to use? I want to use the word carefully. It becomes very subtractive to what we're trying to do as a whole. if that makes sense, because it has been easier than ever to make money. It has been easier than ever to acquire a fancy car. It has been easier than ever to buy a house. As much as other people would say the opposite, it's not easy to buy a nice car. It's not easy to buy a house. It's not easy to make money. It really is. We're in the age of the last decade of the most millionaires at a young age than ever we've had before, and that's with the inflation and shift of money increasing. And so the stats are there. It's definitely true. It just may not be true for every category of human being. So, you know, for people who leverage that to their advantage, I mean, hey, sometimes people have a good intention behind it because that person in that moment might need that motivation. Unfortunately, do I think motivation is the answer? No, but if it gets somebody started, then okay.
Yeah, I think it's like you said, it's the motive and the intent behind it. I just really feel like, because I'm not the one to be like, oh, I make this amount of money and, show like, oh, I live in this zip code or drive this particular car. It's more so like literally, um, how can I attract you with the knowledge and the information and the content to ensure that the business that I serve you with my clients is the actual 100% exactly what it is without showing all the things, because you don't see Bill Gates or anybody else very wealthy that's doing all of the things, but it just seemed like it's the wrong type of attraction for
Yeah.
the age we're in. You know what I'm saying?
It's more like what I tell people all the time is success isn't success if you can't duplicate it, right?
Right,
And
right.
if you look at any major company, they have duplicated success because they have set up CEOs, set up COOs, set up HR, set up companies, set up structures to where their business functions with or without them. Bill Gates got kicked out of Microsoft, and Microsoft is still a very well and active functioning company. Amazon, he's not there doing the day-to-day tasks or services for it. Elon with Tesla, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of things that goes on behind the scenes that average or normal business people, entrepreneurs, small business people, startups never get wind of or don't even know. Just even going over government contracting the other day with my guy Kev Jennings, and a lot of people were taken back from the DEI rollbacks, and it was unfortunately the black community. And if you really go to the whitehouse.gov and you look at their website on what it is, it doesn't even really affect our community, and it never really has. And people, because of social media, have been up in arms like, oh man, they hate black people. Let's stop shopping here. Let's stop doing this. Let's stop doing that. And it was not the narrative for us. And half of them, not even half, more than half, aren't even considered real businesses federally. A lot of people think they get their LLC and their corporation and that's it. But are you even registered with um
Done.
I don't know why it's slipping me. The federal government website where you
Stamps.
get your FEID number. Everybody's so used to an EIN, you can register there for free, get a FEID number. Now you're open up to doing business with the government directly, government contracting. You open yourself up for actual SBA loans. The DEI program was catered towards, loans and grants that people weren't using and that they were kept putting out there. And it wasn't really going anywhere. If you
Mhm.
look at the numbers, which are on the websites, they've been doing this for decades, longer than that. And you'll have something. I think the category I remember the most is women. Women owned businesses. There were about 12 million state registered businesses. 5,000 of them had an actual FEID.
Mm. Yeah, so you talking about like SAMS.gov and having a
Yes,
DUNS
exactly.
number.
Sam.gov. There we
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Yep.
It's funny too because a lot of the when you go into corporations, a lot of the DEI, even when they just decided to just move away from the whole department altogether, a lot of them are not African American women or African Americans that are working in these departments, so they didn't know that either. So
Yep.
that's a whole nother story and conversation. But yes, I'm with you. It really does not affect us the way they think. But again, it goes back to education yourself.
Yep.
Going to making sure that you know exactly what's real and what's not, right? So you're dead on with that. For sure, for sure. So what's your goal? What is your goal right now? Because I know you not only have your podcast, you do business coaching. What else do you do?
Honestly, what I'm really trying to be more conscious of now is I'm trying to emotionally live for myself more. You know,
Mm.
being the level of business that I've been able to do over the past few years, I've been hyper focused on just business, helping everybody else, and I haven't really put that much time to myself to be a human being. And the military helped me cut off emotions. Growing up the way I did helped me cut off emotions, and I grew up through a lot of trauma. I solidified my wealth and stuff through a lot of trauma, and I taught people to thug it out, lose sleep, get the work done, do all of this, which is a almost kind of traumatic way of teaching. And right now what I'm trying to do the most is learn the other side of that, how to teach from more of an empathetic state where it's understandable and it's manageable to be able to live life in a different kind of way.
So is that where your alter ego comes in?
Which one?
I don't know. I think you were actually doing an interview and you were like, hey, I have to come up with this alter ego so I can actually have my business self and my personal self to be
Correct.
okay with just sitting on the couch and enjoying your life.
Yeah.
I thought that was a
Yeah.
very interesting way to put things, having a Sasha Fierce type of thing going on
Yeah,
instead.
100%. Yeah. So Rich is that alter ego kind of personality. He's more extroverted. He's here, he's talking about business things. He's kind of cutthroat a little bit to where it's like, hey, let's get it done by any means. This is what we got to do. This is how we flesh it out. This is, XYZ, let's get to it mindset. Forget the motivation. You're not going to like it. You're not supposed to like it, but the end goal is getting to you to where you want to go. And, Darryen, which is my first name, is the introvert. I like being alone. I like the calmness. I like being able to watch anime. I like being able to, play a game every now and then. I like being able to kind of do nothing almost, the tranquility of being just there, just existing. Even when I went on my last two vacations, I told my lady, I said, hey, I want to go somewhere where it's not a big town, where I'm not surrounded by people. And sure enough, we were in the middle of the jungle for both of them. And I enjoyed it because it was isolating and being able to give myself that time to isolate. I always ask people, when is the last time you actually spent 24 hours with yourself, by yourself as an adult? And that's no cell phone, no social media, no husband, no kids, no outside strangers, no anything. Just you and nature, if that's where you are, you and your house, if that's where you are, you and just yourself, your thoughts. And you'll be surprised. Not many people get to do that, if at all. And when they do get a chance to do it, because I've had a few of my students actually do it, the stuff that comes up, the emotional processing that happens, the mental processing that happens, the physical processing that happens, the acceptance that happens, the thoughts that start to cultivate, all of those things that start to bring things up when they go back, to what's considered their normal life or their everyday. It's different. They're
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. I prefer being alone though. I always have, and I guess that's because of my experiences of losing my mom when I was 12 and then just being able to sit with myself, but I've had a lot of conversation with God as well. So, being very in tune with knowing that he is actually with me all the time. And so you that's the attractiveness for me, someone that actually knows who they are and what God is actually doing in your life, but you have to be in tune with that. So the
Yeah.
attractiveness of that is more so knowing what your purpose is, not just finding the purpose to discovering the purpose, but being okay with who you are and knowing that sometimes your message, but don't allow yourself to sit into it so long to where you kind of lose yourself. Is that thing? If am I making
A
sense?
100%. I definitely agree with that, and I agree with it even more when it comes to business because a lot of people will sacrifice their morals or sacrifice their image, their brand for money or for what's current or what's popular. I teach people how to scale their business and how to be more popular on social media, how to gain followers, how to do XYZ. I can do it for my own brand, but I don't feel like that's my brand. My brand is on a if you know me kind of vibe because I'm intentional with who receives my energy, who receives me, who I come across, who I interact with. And it's that way for a reason because I am not meant for everybody. And people meet me at a time in their life when they need me. And so, with me interacting with things that way, I don't want to scale my business because my first company, ROV, that's exactly where it was going. That's how we landed Hard Rock and Bacardi, Morgan Freeman, Emilio Estefan, 100 Black Men of America, 100 Black Kids of America, the list goes on. I was out there doing what it needed to do to scale that business. I had to rescind myself and now I have 54 other people that do that activation. I have a CEO over there that does all the day-to-day stuff. I have employees, contractors over there that do the day-to-day stuff, and I kind of just foresee the P&Ls and everything on the back end, and I'm just completely back end. I don't really do anything. So being able to take myself out of that position of being the limelight. Too many small businesses try to be the limelight for their own business, and that honestly keeps you behind because now you're stuck being the face of that. If you pull away, you lose money. If you pull away, you lose traction, you lose followers, you lose people because that's what people have connected with over time. And so, being able to build a business that can be a business without you is what I advocate for more nowadays.
Mm, building a business that advocates for you. So, before I let you go, so actually I have two more questions actually. So you're doing the podcast. You're my podcast brother. And you also have the business coaching. And so we here in this space that you have to have all of these followings, you have to do all of these posting, and you have to do all of these things when it comes down to social media. What is your take on that? Because me personally, I don't, and maybe I should, and you can just tell me if I'm wrong, but I really don't try to focus too much on that because I didn't grow up in the era of social media. I enjoy building authentic, connections with people just through communicating, like how we reached out to one another. Because I feel like if you are in my space, my sole purpose is to ensure that I pour into you the way God intended me to pour into you. And I value just ease. I don't appear, I don't do all of the posting just to post. It's just not my thing. So tell me what's your take on that, because maybe I'm looking at it wrong and I need a different approach. You can
Yeah,
coach me on
my
that.
take on it my take on it is make your own life easy, and it doesn't come free, it doesn't come cheap. It comes with dedication. You don't get the team that you want, you build the team that you want. And that, I mean, and the essence, the core of everything. A lot of people think they can go on Indeed or wherever and just hire people. It doesn't work that way. You'll find somebody that just wants to work for a check. You have to find people that are attached to your mission, even if it's not something that they saw in their future. How big is your vision, and can your vision translate to the person next to you? Can you really spark that flame? And this comes down to leadership. Leaders spark flames. Leaders get people to do stuff. If you go back to mythical stories like the 300 Spartans, how does a leader get 300 Spartans to say, "Hey, I'm cool with going against 100,000 other people in their army"? You know what I mean? And how does a leader like Napoleon get people to go into a situation where they're at odds? How does a leader get anybody to do something? You have to be a leader that is going to lead. And by leading, I mean delegation. I don't do anything with my social medias. I literally don't touch my studio page. I don't touch my YouTube. I don't touch my podcast page. I don't touch any of that. Even right now, we're on a Zoom call, but I have Sims, my engineer. He's there engineering this right now. I don't do any of that. And so being able to delegate what seems like a small task that you can do as the boss of your company, as the CEO of your company, because you can realistically, you're capable. You're a human being. You're intelligent. You're capable of doing it. But why? Why do
Mm,
we let ourselves get comfortable with doing things that you can be focused on other things if you're the leader? Not everybody has the leader position. Not everybody has the role that you do. And so value your own time, value your own essence, and delegate, task it out, build that business, and you have to build it with a team. You can't do it alone. All these people that try to be a solopreneur and try to figure it out, and even give the excuse, hey, I'm just starting, hey, I'm just doing whatever. If you go and look at how so many other companies started off, you'd be surprised. Most of the ones who still lasted today came from people that built their teams, not people that just hired for it. Now, do I have people that I just hired? Yes, that came later though. But when it comes to really starting and scaling, you got to start from the ground up.
Yeah. Yeah, work inside that allows you to work on your business, not in your business. Right.
Hmm.
Exactly. Exactly. So tell us, where can the listeners find you, and if they're interested in actually, getting connected with you as a business coach, being on your podcast, how can they find you and get connected?
Yeah, you can find me on all platforms at Real Money Bag Rich. Mostly use Instagram, but if you want to listen to our podcast, it's going to be Attractive Mindset Pod on all platforms. Whether you listen to it audio wise or you want to watch the videos on YouTube, we have over almost 200 episodes now of live in person. I don't do any virtual podcast on there because it's literally all about connection, and we go over how people got to where they are today. And we've gotten messages from Spain, where people have been wanting to take their life or whatever, through email, and they're saying, hey, I watched your episode, and that person has a very similar situation to me, and me hearing their story and seeing where they came out on the other side of it, tell me that I don't have to give up, or I don't have to quit. So if you're into hearing how other people got to where they are, definitely head there and check them out.
Oh, this is so good. Thank you so much. I hope everyone that is listening, and even if you're watching it on YouTube, as far as the replay goes, that you have actually receiving and gotten some gems from this interview today, because I know I have. It's one of those things. Remember that it's not about where you come from, it's about what you do after the storm. What are you doing after the adversity to ensure that you can actually give back to the very community that you may have done wrong in, yeah, and changing your mindset. What are the things that you're thinking about to make your mindset attractive, right? It's not about just the amount of money that you can make, but who are you actually helping? How many people are you bringing along to ensure that you're making another great episode of Elevate to Clarity with Latasha Sly? Remember, all things are possible, but clarity makes it elevate. Have a great one.